A decorated veteran bought a remote cabin seeking peace, but his dog unearthed a decades-old secret the town had tried to drown. The sheriff, who should have protected justice, had helped bury it, all to protect a powerful family name. But a rusted recorder, a shaken voice, and a loyal dog unraveled the silence they fought to keep. And just wait until you hear how the truth finally rose from the water, and how justice, at last, found its voice. Jack Rains didn't come to the mountains to be noticed. He came to be left alone. The cabin was small, old, and unlisted, cedar-sided with a warped porch and a rusted mailbox that hadn't held a letter in years. For Jack, it was perfect. After 2 decades of active duty and a final year teaching tactics to rookies who didn't know war the way he knew it, Jack had walked away. Not angrily, not dramatically, just enough. Enough noise, enough bureaucracy, enough pretending he didn't still hear things in his sleep. He didn't call it running. He called it returning. The land came cheap, too cheap if he were honest, but he didn't ask questions. 20 acres of mossy ridgeline, a roof over his head, and trees thick enough to muffle his own thoughts. That was the kind of peace no man could truly earn, but he could try. The cabin stood just off an old forest road, 20 miles of blind turns and pine needle switchbacks from the nearest town. Hayden Ridge, population dwindling. People came here to retire from the world, not to build a new one. That suited Jack just fine. But Jack wasn't entirely alone. Scout, his mottled shepherd mutt with a keen nose and a lopsided ear, had come with him, as loyal as ever. Jack had rescued him from a roadside ditch near Fallujah years ago. Or maybe Scout had rescued him. It was hard to say who'd done more saving. Scout took to the property faster than Jack. On the first day, he bounded through the wet underbrush, tail high, sniffing every log and stump like he'd been here before. On the second, he began to dig, always in the same spot. At first, it seemed harmless, a patch of loamy earth between 2 weathered birch trees, downhill from the back of the cabin, where the soil remained damp even when the rest of the woods had dried out. Scout would spend an hour each morning pawing at the dirt, then sit beside the hole like he was waiting for something. Jack let it go. The dog had earned his quirks. But by the 4th morning, the hole had deepened, and Jack's curiosity outpaced his apathy. With coffee in one hand and a shovel in the other, he wandered down in the cold mist to take a look. He dug casually at first, just to humor the dog. The soil was rich, almost black, fungal, quiet. Then the blade of the shovel struck something solid, a dull, unmistakable clang that silenced the birds. Jack froze. He crouched down, pushed aside clumps of mud and roots, and unearthed a small metal tin, rusted, caved in at the corner, the lid barely holding. He pried it open with a flat stone. Inside was a heart-shaped locket, the kind you might buy for a teenage girl. Its enamel had cracked, flaking off around the edges, but the faint pink surface still showed a cursive letter B. Nestled beside it was something light, brittle, and chalky. At first glance, it could have been a tree root. But Jack had seen too many bones in too many places where no bones should have been. This wasn't driftwood. It was human, and not recent. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not exactly, but the awful weight of recognition. The kind of feeling that war teaches you to bury but never really forget. A simple truth lodged in his throat. The quiet he'd bought wasn't empty. He didn't hesitate. He called 911. The dispatcher sounded half asleep until he said the word bone. After that, everything accelerated. 2 sheriff's cruisers rumbled up the forest road within the hour, their tires chewing gravel, lights off but serious. What had been a sanctuary turned into a crime scene. Jack watched from the porch as county deputies fanned out, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. They stepped carefully, voices low, measuring and photographing the hollow Scout had uncovered. A second team flagged off the slope and began brushing earth from what appeared to be a wider, disturbed patch.
That's when he met Sheriff Ray Cotter. Cotter was a tall man in his 50s, built like a linebacker but moving like a bureaucrat. His handshake was firm and practiced, too practiced. His eyes didn't linger. His badge sat heavy on a button-down flannel shirt. His smile curved in the shape of someone used to being obeyed. "You live here?" Cotter asked, already knowing the answer. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't friendly either. Jack said, "Just moved in last week." "And the dog found this?" Jack nodded, eyes never leaving the locket now sealed in a plastic evidence pouch. Scout wouldn't stop digging. Figured he was onto something. Cotter glanced at the dog, then back at Jack. His eyes narrowed just enough. "You touch anything else?" Jack kept his voice calm. "Only the tin. Opened it, saw the bone. Called you." There was a beat. Cotter's nod was slow, thoughtful. "Army?" "Marine." "Thought so. You've got the look." Jack didn't respond. He didn't like being profiled, even if it came with compliments. Behind Cotter, a deputy started whispering to another. Jack watched their eyes shift toward him, then to the dirt. The mood had changed. Something unspoken passed through the air, cold and ancient like the wind that came down the ridge. And in that moment, Jack realized this wasn't new to them. That night, after the last cruiser rolled down the road and the forest crept back in, Jack sat at his kitchen table, the same table he planned to oil and refinish that weekend. The locket's image replayed in his mind, the soft letter B, the dull shimmer of something lost too long. His fingers hovered over the laptop keys. He typed Hayden Ridge Missing Persons and scrolled. The name stood out like a scream in silence. Bethany King. 20 years old, vanished in 2005. Last seen leaving a community meeting about layoffs at the Hargrove lumber mill. The article mentioned a boyfriend, a sister, a Jeep Cherokee that had never been recovered. The FBI had been involved. Helicopters, dogs, nothing ever found. Until now. Jack leaned back in the creaky chair and listened to the cabin settle. Wood expanding, roof sighing, the sound of peace trying to exist in a place where the past wasn't done yet. Scout curled up at his feet, unaware, or maybe too aware, of the secret he dragged back into the light. Jack stared at the dark window and understood something no brochure had warned him about. He hadn't just bought land, he'd bought a story. And that story still had something to say.
2 days after the discovery, the fog lifted from the valley, and with it came Agent Nora Pierce of the FBI. She didn't arrive with sirens or ceremony, no convoy, no badge-flashing dramatics. Just a silver SUV, federal plates, and a woman in her 40s with a windbreaker zipped halfway and eyes that looked like they'd seen one truth too many. Nora Pierce wasn't here to make speeches. She was here to do the job, 20 years late, but here. Jack met her on the porch. She took in the property with one slow turn of her head, like measuring the silence itself. No wasted words, no apologies for the Bureau's absence until now. She extended a hand, firm grip, no small talk. "I'm here for the girl," she said. Inside the cabin, she spread a thin file across Jack's dining table. The pages looked tired, photocopies of photocopies, edges curled from age and repetition. Jack saw the name before she said it. Bethany King. One photo showed her at a rally, mouth open mid-sentence, fist raised. Another was quieter, Bethany sitting with her sister Lila on the back of a pickup. They couldn't have been older than 19. Bethany wore a denim jacket covered in faded patches. Union strong, no silence, and one with a broken hourglass. Her eyes were sharp, proud, defiant. Agent Pierce tapped the last image. This is the last confirmed sighting, May 3, 2005. After that, vanished. Not a car, not a footprint, nothing. Jack leaned closer. And the search? "We grid-searched the valley for weeks," Pierce said. "We had dogs, aerial teams, volunteers. Problem is, we were looking at the wrong maps. She flipped another sheet toward him, topographical charts from 2005 and now. The land shifted. Property lines were misrecorded. Beavers dammed a stream that turned half a mile of old lowland into a flood basin. Back then, that slope, she pointed out toward the birches, was high and dry. We trusted the documents, but the documents were wrong. Jack didn't answer right away. It wasn't that mistakes couldn't happen. He'd seen good men fail under bad maps in war zones. One wrong line could change the outcome of a whole mission. But this was different. This was home. Or supposed to be. The piece he'd chased up the mountain had been solid for all of 4 days before the ground underneath it shifted. Now it felt like he was standing on someone else's unfinished sentence. Later that afternoon, restless and unable to sit still, Jack walked the land again. Not as a property owner, but the way he'd patrolled alleyways in Kandahar. Slowly, curiously, reading every branch, every change in slope, every unnatural sound or lack of it. Scout guided him. Not with urgency, with instinct. The dog circled behind the original dig site, then started tugging toward a half-rotted stump tucked in shadow. Jack followed, brush crackling under his boots. The dirt here was wetter, darker. As he dug with the edge of his boot, then a shovel, something resisted. Metal. He cleared the soil with care. It was a rectangular container, rusted olive green, with the ridged lid of a military-issued ammo can, the kind that survived nearly anything. The paint flaked off under his fingertips. Inside, wrapped in a strip of oilcloth, were 3 things. A microcassette recorder, its plastic warped and its batteries corroded white like frostbite. A sheriff's department patch, an older design with sun-bleached stitching and a tear through one corner, and a ring of keys. The tag on the ring read 99 Cherokee. Jack stared at them for a long time. Then he stood. There was only one place in Hayden Ridge that could handle what came next. Parker's photo and video sat between a laundromat and a bait shop on Main Street. The man behind the counter, Ed Parker, had a reputation for 2 things: never throwing anything away and never asking questions unless he absolutely had to. Jack laid the tape recorder on the counter. "Think you can get this running?" he asked. Parker tilted his head. "I haven't seen one of these in a while." He opened a drawer, rummaged through adapters and wires until he found a universal power supply. He hooked the recorder to an external speaker, adjusted the input, and pressed play. The sound was faint, the tape grainy, but the voices were there. "Ray, it's Mason. Dad's gonna kill me. She ran out. Jesus, there's blood. Ray, I'm at mile marker 12, the new pond. Ray, please." Silence. Then a second voice, older, steadier, measured like a man used to keeping things quiet. "Stay put. Lights off. Don't talk to anyone." The tape clicked and ended. Jack felt a cold weight settle behind his sternum. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. The names. Mason. Ray. Mason Hargrove, son of Charles Hargrove, the town's wealthiest man, the man whose lumber empire had once employed half of Hayden Ridge, whose name is still etched into the Civic Center. And Ray, there was only one Ray with that kind of voice in Hayden Ridge, Sheriff Ray Cotter, the same man who'd stood on Jack's porch just 2 nights ago, asking about Scout, asking what Jack had touched. Jack drove home without turning the radio on. That night, as wind swirled through the trees and pine needles scraped the roof, Jack sat alone at the kitchen table, the recorder between his hands. Scout lay by the door, ears twitching in uneasy sleep. He played the tape again. Once, then again. Each time, the same thing became clearer. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a panicked kid lost in the woods. This was a cover-up in real time. A man calling for help and another man telling him how to disappear it. Jack had spent years in places where truth was a casualty, where silence was currency and orders carried consequences. But this was different. This was home. This was a girl's life. And this was a town that looked the other way for 20 years. Jack stood, breath shallow, and looked at the items spread across the table. The locket, the patch, the recorder. He wasn't an investigator. He wasn't law enforcement. But the truth had dug itself up. And now it was staring him in the face.
She arrived without warning. The sound of gravel shifting under tires pulled Jack from his tool shed just after noon. A pickup truck, a dusty blue Ford, came up the hill slow, as if testing whether the land would let it pass. The woman who stepped out moved like she already knew the answer. Leila King. Even before she spoke, Jack recognized her. Not from the photo, though the resemblance to her sister was unmistakable. It was the jacket that struck him. The same cut of faded denim, the same fierce patches stitched down the sleeves. Newer, sure, but worn with intent, like she'd been carrying a legacy on her shoulders every day for 20 years. She held a plastic evidence bag in both hands. Inside, the locket, Bethany's, the heart-shaped one Jack and Scout had pulled from the earth days earlier. Its chain still tangled from time underground. The letter B, soft and flaked, almost seemed to pulse in the sun. Leila didn't step forward. She stood near her truck, as if the distance gave her control. "I wasn't sure if I'd come," she said. Her voice was calm, but the kind of calm built out of years of grit, not grace. Jack said nothing, just nodded. "I told them," she went on quietly, "told them 20 years ago to check the old beaver ponds. Said Beth would have taken the shortcut through the backwoods. She knew every trail behind this ridge better than most loggers." She looked up at the trees as if waiting for one of them to confirm her memory. None did. "They wrote it down," she added, smiled, nodded, like they were doing homework they didn't plan to hand in. Jack motioned toward the porch. She declined with a slight shake of the head. "I won't be long," she said. He didn't offer small talk. It didn't suit the moment. Instead, he told her about the ammo can, about the keys, the recorder, and what the tape had captured. Mason Hargrove's voice in panic, and Ray Cotter's response, too calm, too prepared. Leila listened without blinking. Only her hands betrayed her, tightening around the plastic bag. "I always wondered," she said, "why Ray kept coming around after they called off the search. He'd stop by with his wife's casseroles, ask if I'd heard from Beth, said he just wanted to check in. He was a deputy back then, young, friendly, trustworthy, I guess." She swallowed. "But those casseroles, his wife didn't cook. Everyone knew that. People do a lot of helping when they need you to stay quiet. Guilt is a sneaky visitor." Jack watched her as silence settled again. In her face, he saw a different kind of grief. Not the raw, frantic kind, but the grief that calcifies when no one listens. The kind that becomes part of you. Later that afternoon, Scout grew restless. He tugged at the leash before Jack even picked it up. His ears twitched toward the eastern slope, the part of the land Jack hadn't explored in full yet. The dog led him past the old dig, past the birches, and up through a narrow trail flanked by thick underbrush. At the top, the ground leveled into a gentle basin. There, nestled in the earth's natural curve, was a pond. Shallow, still, brown from tannins and runoff. A quiet mirror ringed by reeds. From a distance, it looked ordinary, but Jack's military instincts told him otherwise. He pulled out a handheld GPS and overlaid a satellite map from the town archives. What should have been an access road, old unused, vanished under the edge of the water. A strange kink in the terrain suggested the road had once run straight across what was now a pond, which meant the water hadn't always been there. He went back to the cabin and returned with a drone,
a cheap model he'd bought online to film sunrises from the ridge. He launched it above the treetops, watching the live feed on his phone as it swept over the pond's surface. For a moment, just mud and leaves. Then, a glint. He adjusted the camera. A grill, chrome-edged, dulled by silt and water. Nearby, a wheel rim, a faint rectangular shape beneath the surface, obscured by years of sediment. His throat tightened. By dusk, the dive team had arrived. 3 vehicles, lights low, no sirens, just the solemn rhythm of procedure. Sheriff Ray Cotter was already on site. He stood beside 2 deputies Jack hadn't met, both younger, both silent. Cotter's face looked carved from stone. No warmth, no anger, just that strange hollowness Jack had noticed when they first met, as if something inside him had closed a long time ago and no longer invited visitors. "You've done your civic duty, Mr. Raines," Cotter said without greeting. It wasn't a suggestion. Jack didn't move. Neither did Agent Pierce, who stepped forward at his side, hands tucked in her coat pockets, voice dry and steady. "If this pond crosses on to the Hargrove property," she said, "and if what we believe is down there belongs to the missing vehicle on file from 2005, then this isn't your scene to control." She paused. "And I'll call the U.S. Attorney's Office tonight if I need to." Cotter held her gaze. Just for a moment, a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Doubt, fatigue, whatever it was, it stayed just long enough to matter. Then he stepped back. The divers went in. The water churned in soft spirals as they descended. The light dimmed behind the treetops. Minutes passed. Then came the straps, tethered beneath the surface, tightening as the Jeep Cherokee was slowly pulled free of its grave. Water cascaded off the roof in heavy sheets, like the past refusing to let go. The vehicle was rusted, but unmistakable. The license plate, barely legible, matched the registration number for Bethany King's car. As the divers opened the rear compartment, they found remnants: a torn denim scrap, a bracelet chain, no heart pendant attached. Leela had arrived sometime in the middle of it all. She said nothing at first, just watching, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. As the Jeep's frame settled onto the trailer, she stepped forward. Her body trembled, then steadied. She reached for Jack's arm, not to lean, but to anchor herself. Her fingers were ice cold. "This is it," she whispered. "She's home." Jack wanted to believe that was enough. But it wasn't relief he felt. Not yet. Not with Sheriff Cotter standing 10 feet away, staring into the trees like they might offer him a way out, or with the tape still in his drawer, or with the name Mason still echoing in his head. Names carried weight in this town, and Jack Raines was beginning to understand exactly how heavy silence could be when you built a whole town on top of it.
News doesn't wait in towns like Hayden Ridge. By the time the Jeep was hauled out and Bethany King's name hit the sheriff's log, word had already spread, not by phones or headlines, but the faster way, through back fences, gas pumps, and the line at the post office. The kind of news that doesn't need confirmation to feel true. And by morning, the press trucks arrived. They came with lenses long enough to stare into people's guilt, and microphones soft enough to catch the things no one dared say out loud. Charles Hargrove issued a statement from his lakefront estate the next county over. A few short lines about resilience, community, and prayer. He didn't mention his son. He didn't mention Bethany. Just a vague call for healing, as if time had already earned the right to blur the edges of what had been done. Mason Hargrove, the boy from the tape, now a man in a blazer too clean for dirt roads, stayed out of sight. When a reporter caught a glimpse of him leaving the courthouse annex, his face looked thinner than the photos from years ago. Not from age, from privilege stretched too tight. He kept his head down. He didn't speak. Ray Cotter, the sheriff who once walked these streets like he owned the quiet, said nothing at all. No press conference, no denial, just a plain shirt where his badge used to be, and a silence too heavy to be confused for dignity. That night, Jack sat on his porch, the air still and sharp with coming frost. The recorder was in his lap again,
a spiral-bound notebook beside it. He hadn't planned to press play, but his fingers knew otherwise. He rewound the tape past Mason's panicked confession, past the breathless plea. He found a second message, buried deep in the recording, almost hidden. The tone was different, lower, slower. Not fear now, but resignation. "Ray, it's done. The wrecker can't get down the old road. Gotta sink it. You said nobody uses the beaver pond." A pause, a long one. Ray, I didn't mean to. She stepped out. I swerved. She hit The tape fuzzed into static. Then the last sentence came through, soft but unshakable. "For the town, Ray. Dad says for the town." Jack stopped the playback. That phrase, he'd heard it before. Not just here, overseas, in cities caught between corruption and fear, in briefings where consequences were justified as collateral. For the town, for the mission, for the greater good. It always sounded the same, like someone trying to convince themselves that survival was the same as integrity. But survival has its own price. At dawn, Jack didn't wait. He took the recorder to Agent Nora Pierce, who was already posted up in the motel lobby on the edge of town, a room that smelled like old coffee, older carpet, and things people tried to forget. She looked up from a stack of yellowing files and nodded as Jack handed her the device. No small talk, no need. She plugged it in, played it once, didn't pause. Her eyes didn't move much, just stared ahead, like she was watching a film only she could see. When the final line landed, "Dad says for the town," she exhaled slowly and turned to Jack. 20 years ago, she said, there was a flood, a natural one. Beavers dammed the East Channel, the valley filled. The original search was plotted off a CAX map from the 90s. That map was wrong. We missed the water line. We missed the Jeep. That's on us. She tapped the recorder. But this is obstruction. This is conspiracy. She said it like a verdict, not like an opinion. And just like that, the pace of things changed. Pierce moved, and the town moved with her. The recorder was logged into federal evidence. The U.S. attorney signed off on preliminary subpoenas. A grand jury was quietly convened 2 counties away to avoid press contamination. Depositions were taken, quietly, formally, but steadily. People who hadn't spoken in years suddenly found themselves remembering things. A gate that was suddenly locked. A trail that was under construction for months. A deputy who switched shifts and never said why. And then came the call. Ray Cotter didn't answer the first one. But the second, he couldn't ignore. That evening, just as the last light drained from the hills, Jack saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. Cotter stood with his hat in hand, not stepping onto the porch, just hovering in the half-shadow, like a man arriving at a graveyard, unsure if he should apologize or just be still. He looked older than before, smaller somehow, like the uniform had held him up more than anyone realized. "You don't know what it was like then," Cotter said, his voice low, even. "The mill was closing. Half the town was out of work. People were scared. Bethany, she was trying to help, I know that now, but raising hell in a town that's already cracking, it scares folks, and scared folks do dumb things." He paused, looked at the ground. "Mason called me, crying, said she'd stepped in front of his car, that she wasn't moving. He didn't know what to do. I didn't either." He looked up, eyes glassy but dry. "She was already gone, that's what I told myself. That it wouldn't change anything. That if we brought the town more pain, we'd lose the rest of it too." Jack didn't move, didn't blink. "You buried her car," he said quietly. "You told Mason to stay. You told him to say nothing. You let her sister carry a question for 20 years. Cotter didn't argue. He just swallowed hard. "Sometimes," he said, "a man gets one chance to keep a town from breaking." He looked toward the cabin. "You bought this place for quiet. You of all people should understand what a man does to get quiet." Jack stood slowly. Scout came to his side, ears perked, but calm. "I bought quiet," Jack said, his voice steady, "because I can live with myself. That's not the same thing as burying the truth." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Cotter nodded, just once, not in defiance, not in anger, like a man who had finally heard the words he'd been avoiding for years, a truth that had waited too long to be said aloud. He turned and walked back into the trees, his shoulders lower than before. The next day, he didn't come back. He went to Agent Pierce instead.
Ray Cotter's confession wasn't loud. It didn't echo across podiums or break news feeds and flashing headlines. It didn't sound like redemption or justice or heroism, but it sounded like truth. In his sworn statement, Cotter detailed the night Bethany King vanished, the late call from Mason, the panicked voice of a boy too rich to be hardened, too soft to be cruel, and too sheltered to know what real consequences looked like. The failed attempt to pull the Jeep up the slope with a worn-out tow cable. The decision to sink it in a beaver pond no one thought mattered. The hope that flood maps and silence would hold the rest down. He named names. Charles Hargrove, who made one call and followed it with a cash-filled envelope, who said the town would bleed if scandal broke, who asked Ray Cotter a simple question with no clean answer. Can you live with the alternative? And Cotter, the man who once believed a badge was a promise, not a shield, broke under the weight of that question and kept the answer buried for 20 years. He resigned from his post the day after the testimony. He took a plea deal. He didn't fight it. Mason Hargrove was charged with negligent homicide and obstruction of justice. His attorneys leaned on youth and trauma, but the tape didn't blink. It didn't forget. The voice on the recording wasn't calculated. It was scared, impulsive, human, but it was clear. Charles Hargrove faced federal conspiracy counts. He lawyered up before the first indictment. For a man who once donated a library and bought a mayor's campaign in the same week, the courtroom was a colder world. And through it all, the town listened. In courtrooms, in diners, on porches where trust used to live. People didn't shout. They didn't cheer. They just sat still, trying to relearn the weight of a name they had once spoken without thinking. For Leila King, closure didn't feel like a door slamming shut. It felt more like a room with windows, open, clear, and facing forward. She held her sister's locket at the pond's edge one morning and laid it gently into a small memorial of river stones. There, she placed a bronze plaque with a single engraved letter, B. No dates, no explanation, just a mark that said someone was here. And we remember now. A few days later, she brought coffee to Jack's porch. They sat in silence for a while, watching mist roll off the slope where the Jeep had surfaced. Then she said something that stayed with him longer than any headline. She was loud because she loved this place. Loud people don't get forgiven first, but sometimes they get remembered right. That evening, Agent Nora Pierce texted Jack from the highway. Just 3 words. Thank your dog. Jack read it twice, then once more. It was the first time in years a message like that didn't feel like an order or a warning or a problem waiting to be solved. It felt like a lightness earned through something heavier. At sunset, Jack took his usual walk down the slope, the one Scout had insisted on during those first strange mornings. The air smelled of wet cedar and the hint of some wildflower he still didn't know the name of. He paused near the birches and looked out over the water. There had once been silence here, but not the peaceful kind, the brittle kind, the kind that chokes. Now it felt different. Still quiet, yes, but honest. He thought about the tape, about how the past had waited, patient, under water and lies and misdrawn property lines. He thought about Ray Cotter, not as a villain, but as a man who mistook control for care,
and lost something sacred trying to protect something flawed. He thought about maps, how they lie, how they erase, how they draw lines that don't always follow truth. And he thought about how Scout, a dog who couldn't read a thing, had sniffed through that lie and refused to let it stay buried. That night, Jack took a small bag of wildflower seed he'd bought months ago, back when the only thing he planned to dig was a garden. He scraped a clean patch of earth near the birches and sowed them gently into the dirt. In spring, he figured, something new would grow there. Color would rise from the place where silence once ruled. A reminder that even after 20 years, something beautiful could come through. He placed the empty ammo can on a shelf in the tool shed, next to the gardening trowel and a coil of twine. It didn't belong in a museum. It wasn't a trophy. It was a container. And containers, he realized, were only as honest as what you put inside. He turned toward the cabin. The porch light spilled warm squares across the grass. Scout trotted ahead, tail swaying, doing what he always did, checking everything twice, then waiting by the door as if to say, "This is ours now." And when Jack stepped inside, the quiet that greeted him wasn't afraid or fragile. It had room for names now, room for truths spoken out loud. It felt earned. And in Hayden Ridge, a town once held together by omission, people began to speak those names. Bethany King, not the girl who vanished, but the woman who stood for something. Ray Cotter, a man who broke and then told the truth. Mason Hargrove, the voice on the tape and the weight of a moment that changed everything. Nora Pierce, the agent who didn't blink and didn't stop. Jack Rains, the man who came looking for peace and found a name buried in his backyard. And Scout, who simply followed his nose and found what others chose not to see. Before the case closed, Agent Pierce told Jack, off the record, that the FBI had reopened a handful of other cold cases using updated topography grids. One in another county had already given a waiting family something they hadn't allowed themselves to hope for. Sometimes, it turns out, peace spreads. That night, Jack slept without dreams of corridors or alarms. He woke to sunlight on his face and the scent of pine in the air. And in that moment, he understood. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, shovel by shovel, truth by truth, until even the water gives back what it tried to keep.